YXBA is back and I'm ready to mash some more buttons.
Tiger uppercut!
So, courtesy of the talented guys over at Giant Bomb, we got what looks like a leak of a PS4K document that was sent out from Sony to developers, which reveals the codename for it is Neo, which is actually quite fitting considering that the codename for the PSVR was Morpheus. And, you know, it's kind of got me thinking a little bit. I feel like Sony has a weird way of structuring their company. I feel like they let the engineers decide what the final names of their products are going to be, and they let the marketing people pick the code names, because the code names are cool and the actual final names of their products are really, really logical and boring. Like, they had a controller at one point in time that was called the 6-axis because it had 6 axes of motion controls. And then Morpheus ended up being called PSVR, which is basically the way Sony has always done things, just really logical. Like PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4. Honestly, that's like writing a book and calling your book a book. Whatever. It just seems a little bit weird. It seems like really old school marketing where you just basically give the product a name that is a description of what it does. I wonder if Tesla Motors would have been better off calling their company Fast Electric Cars. That would have been pretty exciting, no? Anyways, I'm getting sidetracked here. So what I really want to talk about is, first of all, some of the specs. I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty details because the specs are all over the internet. Just Google PlayStation Neo specs and you will find it. But basically what we're getting is a situation that reminds me a lot of the GameCube, and then upgrading the GameCube to the Wii. If you can basically take the Wii remote out of the picture and just look at the architectures, what you're getting is basically 2 PlayStation 4s duct taped together. I know the Sony fanboys love to say that about the GameCube and the Wii back in the day, but it seems like history is now repeating itself in the context of the PlayStation family. The CPU is slightly more powerful, and it's basically the same CPU that they had in the original PlayStation 4. I guess it's kind of going to be known as the baseline PS4, and the GPU seems to be actually considerably faster. It's got double the compute units, and it also has a slight clock speed improvement. But actually, when you look at it, you might be, well, it's only double this and 20% more of that, so overall it's maybe 60% more powerful. Well, that's not actually the way that it works. It's more like, if you think in terms of a CPU, if you went from 8 cores on a CPU to 16 cores on a CPU, plus additionally you increase the clock speeds, it would be more than double the overall power. And that's basically what you're getting with the graphics card on the Neo. It's going to be twice as many compute units, and then also higher clock speeds, and potentially with a more modern architecture, although we don't have any confirmation of that. Digital Foundry has speculated that it may in fact be using the new Polaris architecture from AMD, but we'll have to wait on that. So on top of that, the other details we got was that the RAM is actually going to be faster, which I think, again, it's not a huge boost. It is enough of a boost that I think you'll definitely notice a difference in terms of the detail level of the textures in the game. They didn't really need to increase the amount of RAM because most games are not using the 6 gigabytes of RAM that are currently available to PlayStation 4 developers, because they simply cannot stream the textures into the game fast enough to take advantage of that large of a pool of RAM. So overall, like, the specs are nice. It's not a huge improvement. I think a good example would be maybe going from the GameCube over to the Wii. Maybe a little bit more of a boost than that, but there's going to be the major caveat of not being able to specifically build a game from the ground up for the PS4K. Every game is going to have to run well on the original PlayStation 4, and that's going to be the primary development target for games, because it's a lot easier to port up than to port down. There's some requirements that Sony giving to developers. It sounds like every game is going to run on the PS4K or the Neo automatically. There will be some sort of a mode that the regular games will be playable on the PlayStation 4K even if they are not patched. However, developers will be able to patch older games to take advantage of the increased specs of the new system. And starting in October, every game that comes to the PlayStation 4 will be required to also have PlayStation 4 Neo mode. But there isn't a lot of details on what they will be required to do. It seems like they do have quite a bit of flexibility in how they want to take advantage of the extra power. The one main staple to it is that you can't make a game 60 frames per second on the baseline PS4 and then drop the frame rate down to 30 frames per second on the PS4K and then absolutely obliterate the graphics on the PS4K version. No, games will have to run at least at the same frame rate or better on the PS4K. What we're looking at is a machine that's coming out with the intention of improving performance and maybe only ever so slightly actually improving the graphics. So it's going to be about increasing the resolution. I don't think that AAA games are going to be capable of actually running at 4K resolutions, but I think they will have a slight bump up from 1080p of most of the games on the PS4K, and I think that likely on a 1080p screen, or at least hopefully, there will be an option to convert that extra resolution into super sampling for those of us that still have 1080p TVs and won't be able to take advantage of the higher resolution. And other than that, like, you're going to see probably a game that's struggling to hit 30 frames per second is going to be stabilized at 30 frames per second and maybe a little bit more textures, but it's still, you know, don't expect something amazing. I mean, just look at the difference between The Witcher 3 on PlayStation 4 and The Witcher 3 on PC. It's probably going to end up being a case where the PS4K version hypothetically would have been somewhere in the middle of those two versions of the game. So it's going to be subtle differences, but welcome differences if you're willing to spend the money to upgrade into what it would cost me if I wanted to sell my current PlayStation 4 on the used market and buy a PS4K. And I believe that after I pay taxes, because we got 13% sales tax here, and the exchange rate is going to cost us probably another 30 cents on the dollar, I would still be looking at quite a significant amount of money to upgrade to the PS4K, probably $300 range, give or take what the price of a used PS4 will be worth at the time that the PS4K comes out, and other factors like exchange rates and so on. It's not going to be just a cheap upgrade, which is unfortunate. I think that for myself, obviously I'm getting an NX, and for the vast majority of gamers, I think it's going to be an obvious choice to forgo the Neo. I'm sure it will appeal to the new people who haven't bought a Neo yet, but again, that market, that late generation market, is typically looking for bargains. They're not looking for a more expensive system. They're looking for a discounted system, maybe pick up a bunch of used games for cheap. So I don't know about this move. I think that it's going to really tick off a lot of developers. Imagine that you've been developing a game for PS4 for the past 3 years, and it's targeting a Christmas launch this year, and seemingly at the last minute, Sony is basically saying, no, you can't just finish that game on PS4 and release it. If you want to put it on the regular PS4, you have to upgrade the graphics for the PS4K, something they were likely not told about when they made the initial investment and decision to start developing that game for the PS4. So I don't really get overall where Sony is going with this. The only thing I can think of is they're trying to extend the generation and take advantage of a PS4 that is very popular right now and try and milk a few extra years out of the system. To me, it just seems like an awfully big risk, and the reward isn't that great for Sony because they're already on a roll and they're going to continue to sell PS4s. And a lot of the reason why the PlayStation 4 is doing as well as it is because they put consumers first and they put developers first with the PS4, and they kind of took advantage of some missteps by Microsoft early on when they wanted to force all kinds of behaviors out of the Xbox One that the consumer was not interested in. For example, eliminating the used game market and requiring that your system be connected to the internet at all times in order to use it. So it seems like they might be throwing away some of those positive emotions that have been directed from gamers towards PlayStation and really opening the door for Microsoft and Nintendo to capitalize. So give me your thoughts in the comments below. I'd like to hear what you think about this. Am I way out of line here, or am I striking a nerve? This has been Colin Unger, reminding you to keep your thumbs glued to YXBA. And always remember to select Start. If you enjoyed this video, click like and subscribe.